Evan had it all: success, a beautiful family, and a wife he adored. But when he uncovered that his wife, Emily, had been secretly texting another man, everything he thought he knew about his marriage was thrown into question. As secrets unravel and the truth comes to light, Evan must confront the betrayal that has shaken his entire world. With emotions running high and trust shattered, Evan faces a choice: fight for his marriage or let go of a love he thought was unbreakable. Will their relationship survive, or is it too late to rebuild what's been lost? Tune in to find out. Life doesn't usually come with flashing signs warning you when things are about to change. It just happens. One moment, you're comfortably moving through your days, the rhythm steady and predictable, and then, bam, it all shifts. For me, that shift started on an unusually warm evening in October 2018. We lived in a small, picturesque town called Harbour Crest, a place where everyone smiled a little too brightly, and the air always smelled like fresh-cut grass or the salty ocean breeze. My name is Evan. I was 42, a husband, a father, and the kind of guy who always prided himself on being reliable. Reliable as a husband, reliable as a father, reliable in every part of my life. I'd married Emily when I was 25, right after we both graduated from college. We'd been together for nearly 17 years, and for the most part, we'd built a life that people envied. 2 kids, Ella and Jack, both smart and independent. A house in a nice neighborhood, a steady job at the town's growing marketing firm. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Emily was everything I ever wanted. She was kind, fiercely intelligent, and, back in the day, she had this fire to her, an ambition that matched mine. But in her own way, she always dreamed of opening a small boutique, maybe even a coffee shop. But somewhere along the line, life got in the way. Kids' work. The rhythm of routine. Her dream was still there, but it had become more of a whisper than a shout. And I never minded. I loved that life we built together. Our Saturday mornings spent in the kitchen while the kids bickered over cereal choices. It felt real. So real that I never thought anything could shake it up. But of course, life has a way of throwing curveballs. And that's exactly what happened that fall. It started with little things, little cracks that seemed so minor at the time. But looking back, I can see they were signs. Emily started spending more time on her phone, texting at all hours, even during dinner. She'd laugh at something, and then quickly put her phone down when I glanced over. At first, I thought maybe it was work, or maybe she had a new hobby. But it felt different. She felt different. I wasn't oblivious. I noticed how distant she'd become over the last few months. There was a coldness in the way she spoke to me, an edge that wasn't there before. It wasn't like we were fighting, not exactly. There were no big arguments, no loud moments of confrontation. It was just silence. And when I tried to ask her about it, the responses were always vague, like she was distracted or not really listening. We still went through the motions: family dinners, outings with friends, vacations. But it felt like we were doing it out of obligation, not out of love. And the worst part was, she wouldn't let me in. It felt like she was slipping away, and I couldn't even figure out why. One evening, I came home from work to find her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her phone, her face pale. She looked up when I walked in, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. That night, she told me she had been meeting up with an old friend from college, someone I'd never heard her mention before. She said it was just for coffee, just a catch-up. But when I asked her who he was, she got defensive. "Just an old friend," she said. But something about it didn't sit right with me. Over the next week, I did what I never should have done. I snooped. I didn't like it. It didn't feel right. But the more Emily pulled away, the more I felt like I needed answers. So I went through her phone when she wasn't looking. I found the messages. Sweet, flirtatious messages between her and someone named Chris. And those messages weren't about just coffee. I won't lie, it hit me hard. I felt like I'd been hit in the stomach. The person I'd built my life with, my partner, was reaching out to someone else. It was a betrayal, and I could feel it deep in my gut. I didn't confront her immediately. I didn't want to react out of anger. Even though every part of me wanted to, I needed time to process it, to figure out how to handle it without making a mess of everything. That weekend, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. Take a day for myself. I took the morning off work and went fishing alone, something I hadn't done since before the kids were born. It wasn't about fishing, really. It was about clearing my head, trying to figure out what I was going to do with this mess I'd uncovered. I hadn't even spoken to Emily about it yet, and I didn't know if I ever would. By the time I got home, the house was quiet. Emily was upstairs, and the kids were at a friend's house. I sat in the living room, staring at the quiet. Everything in me told me to talk to her, to demand answers. But something held me back. It wasn't fear. It was uncertainty. What was I really hoping to hear? Was I ready for the truth? When Emily came down that evening, she looked like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. She tried to pretend everything was fine, but the air between us felt thick, like something was hanging over us, waiting to drop. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told her I knew about the messages. Her face went pale, her eyes wide. She didn't try to deny it. Instead, she sat down across from me, her hands shaking slightly. "I never meant for this to happen," she said softly. "I wasn't looking for it. It just happened." I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand why she'd let it happen, why she hadn't talked to me, but I didn't. I just sat there, my heart pounding, the silence suffocating. "Who is he?" I finally asked. My voice didn't even sound like mine anymore. Hoarse, defeated. "Chris," she whispered. "We reconnected a few months ago. He's just someone from my past. I didn't want it to go this far." The worst part, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that it was just a mistake, that it didn't mean anything. But I couldn't. The damage had been done. The trust was broken. And no matter how much I wanted to fix it, no matter how much I still loved her, I knew deep down that things would never be the same again. I asked her if she wanted to end things with Chris, and she nodded, almost immediately. But there was something in her eyes that told me she wasn't completely convinced. She wasn't sure if she wanted to fix this, or if she was just trying to avoid the confrontation. I didn't know what to do after that. Should I forgive her? Should I leave? The future felt uncertain, and I felt completely lost. But one thing was clear. I couldn't stay in the same place anymore. Not with this between us. The next few days passed in a blur. Emily tried to be extra affectionate, trying to show that she was sorry. But it felt hollow. I couldn't shake the image of her texting Chris, of her lying to me, of the secrets she'd kept. We went through the motions, dinner, family activities, but it felt like we were two strangers living in the same house. I didn't know how to move forward. I didn't know if I should fight for my marriage or walk away. But one thing was certain. I was no longer the same person I had been before. Things weren't the same, and we both knew it. But the reality of our situation hit me hardest when I woke up one Saturday morning and found Emily already gone. I'd slept in, something I hadn't done in ages, and when I made my way downstairs, the house was eerily quiet. There was a note on the kitchen counter. It was from Emily. "I needed some time. I'm at my sister's." It wasn't much, just a few words, but it spoke volumes. I stood there for a long time, staring at the note, feeling this emptiness spread inside me. The silence between us had reached a breaking point. She was looking for space, maybe even an escape. But I was left behind, trying to process everything. My head was spinning. Was this her way of avoiding the problem? Or was it her way of telling me she didn't want to fight for this anymore? I couldn't sit still for long, so I grabbed my keys and headed out for a drive. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I needed to get away, clear my mind. I ended up by the water, at the same spot I used to go when I wanted to think. The cold wind hit my face as I stared at the horizon, letting the waves crash against the shore. It felt like I was drowning in uncertainty, unsure of what to do next. Was I supposed to wait for Emily to come back and fix things? Or was it time to make a decision? By the time I returned home, she was back. She'd left the kids with her sister and come back to talk. "I think we need to be honest with each other, Evan," she said, her voice quieter than usual, like she was walking on eggshells. It was the first time in weeks that I felt like she wasn't hiding behind the walls she'd built around herself. Maybe, just maybe, she was ready to face the truth. But honestly, I wasn't sure if I was. I sat down across from her, my heart pounding in my chest. She told me everything. She confessed about Chris, how they'd reconnected after years of being apart. She said it started innocently enough, just some friendly texts, catching up on life. But it escalated when she found herself sharing things with him that she hadn't shared with me in years. Things about her dreams, her frustrations, her feelings of being stuck. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said. Her eyes filled with guilt. "But I felt like I couldn't talk to you anymore. You were so wrapped up in work, in the kids, I didn't know how to ask for more." I could feel the anger bubbling up, but I didn't want to scream at her. I didn't want to start another fight. "You should have talked to me," I said quietly, my voice thick with disappointment. "You didn't need to hide behind messages. You could have told me what was going on." "I know," she whispered. "I know. But I was scared. I didn't want to lose everything we built." It hit me like a punch to the gut. The thing I had feared the most, losing her, was happening. But it wasn't just because of Chris. It was because somewhere along the way, we had lost each other. And now, everything was fractured. And I wasn't sure how to put it back together. The truth was, I had been avoiding the reality of what was happening too. I was just as guilty of neglecting our relationship, of taking her for granted. We had both drifted. And now we were here, standing on the edge of something we might not be able to come back from. "Do you love him?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. She didn't hesitate, but her answer wasn't exactly what I expected. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe I do, but it's not like you think. It's not like I want to leave you, I don't know anymore, Evan. I don't know what I want." And there it was, the cold, harsh truth. She was lost. She didn't know what she wanted, and neither did I. We sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air, and I couldn't find the right words to make sense of it. But I knew I couldn't let this go on forever. "I don't know if I can fix this, Emily," I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can trust you again." She didn't try to convince me otherwise. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She just sat there, tears welling in her eyes. It was the first time I saw her vulnerable in weeks, and it made me feel both sad and guilty. "I don't know if I can fix it either," she said quietly, "but I'm willing to try if you are." And that was the turning point. We both knew we couldn't go back to where we were before. Too much had happened. Too much had changed. But maybe, just maybe, we could build something new. Something real. But that would require us to be honest with each other in ways we hadn't been in years. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for that. Over the next few days, we tried. We talked more than we had in months, digging into the raw, painful stuff we had both been avoiding. Emily apologized, and I apologized too, but it wasn't enough. We both knew that apologies couldn't undo what had been done. Trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight. I went back to the fishing spot a few times, needing space to think, to process what was happening. Emily started staying out late with friends, maybe to give me space, maybe because she wasn't sure what she wanted either. The distance between us only grew, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized I was afraid of losing her, afraid of letting go, but I was also afraid of staying in something that was no longer working. Then came the phone call that would change everything. It was late one evening, just as I was about to go to bed. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen lighting up with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice a little hoarse from a long day. "Evan?" The voice on the other end said. It was a man's voice. "This is Chris." For a second, I froze. I couldn't believe it. Chris, Emily's friend, the one she'd been texting, the one she'd told me wasn't a big deal. "What do you want?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think you should know," Chris said, his voice almost apologetic, "that Emily and I are seeing each other. We've been spending a lot of time together, and I don't want you to hear it from her." My heart dropped. I didn't even know what to say. "Are you serious?" I finally managed to ask, my mind racing. "You think it's okay to tell me this now?" "I'm sorry, man. I didn't mean to cause trouble, but I thought you should know." The line went dead, and I sat there in shock, holding my phone in my hand, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Emily had told me that nothing was happening between them, that she had cut ties with him. But here it was, laid out in front of me, proof that she had lied. And not just lied, but taken things even further than I had ever imagined. I couldn't stay in this anymore. I needed answers. I needed to know the truth, even if it shattered everything. Remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you're enjoying this story. Your support means everything. It was the kind of moment that felt like it was straight out of a movie. A confrontation that would change everything I'd tried to convince myself that maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed, that maybe there was a chance to salvage things. But after Chris's phone call, I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Emily's betrayal wasn't just an emotional slip-up. It had become something much deeper. I couldn't let it go. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to. The anger inside me had taken root, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the man I had been was slipping away. I wasn't just hurt. I was furious. And the worst part, I couldn't bring myself to face Emily just yet. How could I look her in the eye after everything? How could I pretend that things were okay when she was so far gone? But then came the moment I knew was inevitable, the confrontation. I called her that night, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "We need to talk," I said, the words thick in my throat. "You're not going to hide from this anymore, Emily. I know everything, you can't lie to me." She didn't try to defend herself at first. For once, there was silence on the other end of the phone, and I could feel the weight of it, the crushing reality that we were both standing on the edge, and neither one of us knew how to move forward. Emily finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for this to happen, Evan," she said. "I don't know what to say anymore." At that moment, I didn't want her words. I didn't want the apology or the explanation. What I wanted was to hear her admit it, to tell me that she understood what she had done. I wanted her to feel the weight of the betrayal the same way I did. "So what now, Emily?" I asked, the words coming out more harshly than I intended. "What are we doing? Because frankly, I don't know if I can keep pretending this is okay. I don't know if I even want to try." She tried to respond, but I cut her off. "But you said you loved me," I continued, my voice cracking with frustration. "But you went behind my back. You hid things from me, things that I deserved to know." I don't think I can just go back to how things were. Do you understand that? There was another long pause. Emily wasn't the same woman I had married. I had thought that maybe she could come back, that the woman I knew would return. But now, looking at it, it seemed impossible. And I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely audible. I never meant to hurt you, but I think I've hurt you so much already that I don't know how to fix it. The silence between us seemed to stretch for miles. We both knew what was coming next. Emily's words, her apology, weren't going to be enough. I had to decide if I wanted to keep fighting for a marriage that had already broken, or if it was time to let go. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't know the answer. I didn't know what to do. In the days that followed, the tension between us only grew. Emily seemed to throw herself into work and social events more than ever before, almost as if she was trying to distance herself from the mess we had created. And I did what I always did when things got tough. I threw myself into the work I'd been putting off. I focused on the kids, tried to maintain some semblance of normality for their sake. But deep down, I knew things were far from normal. One evening, a few days after the phone call with Chris, Emily came to me. She'd asked for a talk, and this time, there were no defenses, no walls between us. She looked tired, worn down by the weight of everything. But there was something different in her eyes. Something that made me wonder if she was finally ready to face what she'd done. I've been thinking a lot, she began, her voice quiet. And I think we both know that I've hurt you. I don't even know where to begin to make it right. I could tell she was struggling. She was trying to put words to something that neither of us could explain. She wasn't the woman I had married, but that didn't mean she didn't still have pieces of her left. Pieces I wasn't sure I could trust anymore. We can't keep doing this, Emily, I said, my voice hardening. We can't keep pretending like everything's fine. You need to make a choice. Are you going to fix this? Or are you going to keep running? She stared at me, her face a mixture of guilt and confusion. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if I can. But I want to try. I want to try to make it right. Those words, I want to try, hung in the air, but they felt hollow. I wasn't sure if I believed them. I wasn't sure if I could believe her anymore, but for the first time, I had to make a decision. I couldn't let her continue dragging us both through this mess. I needed to know if there was anything left for us to save. The confrontation that followed was a boiling point, one that had been building up for weeks. Emily finally admitted everything she confessed, that she had been seeing Chris, not just meeting for coffee, but having an affair. The betrayal was out in the open, and as the words fell from her lips, I could feel my world shatter. She had been lying to me for months, and I had been too blind to see it. I didn't yell, though I didn't scream. Instead, I stood there, frozen, as I tried to process what was happening. She begged for my forgiveness, but her pleas only made me feel worse. I wasn't sure if I could forgive her. Could I really get past the lies, the secret meetings, the deceit? In the midst of the confrontation, I realized something about myself. I had been so focused on saving our marriage that I had ignored my own needs, my own feelings. I had let Emily's actions slide because I was afraid of facing the truth. But now, it was clear. I couldn't keep living in denial. I don't know if I can do this anymore, I finally said, my voice shaky. I don't know if I can go back to how things were, pretending like nothing happened. And that was the moment everything changed. It wasn't about Emily's mistakes or her apologies. It was about me. I had to choose if I was willing to accept what had happened, or if I was ready to walk away. Emily looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. She didn't speak, but the look on her face said it all. She knew what was coming, and it wasn't what either of us wanted. The next few days were a blur. Emily stayed with her sister, and I tried to keep things normal for the kids, but the reality of it all was sinking in. Emily was no longer just the woman I had married. She had become a stranger, and I was a stranger to her too. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something inside me snapped. The anger, the confusion, the hurt. They had all reached their peak. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I had to let her go. If you're enjoying this story and want to know how it ends, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps me bring more stories to life. The moment Emily confessed everything seemed to collapse. It wasn't just the affair that shook me. It was the fact that I had spent months, years even, blind to the cracks forming beneath our marriage. Emily had become a stranger to me, and it felt like she was just as lost as I was. I didn't know what to do. What do you do when you realize your whole world has been built on lies? Do you fight to save what's left, or do you walk away from the person you thought you knew? The next few days were an emotional whirlwind. Emily kept apologizing, crying, begging for another chance. But each tear she shed only made me more confused. It felt like she was remorseful. Yes, but also scared. Scared that she might lose everything. But what about me? Was I ready to risk everything? The trust was gone, and no amount of apologies could replace that. But then, just when I thought I might be able to start putting the pieces of my life back together, I received a message from Chris. It was brief, but direct. I know things have been complicated, but I want to clear the air. I think we need to talk. I should have ignored it. I should have deleted the message and moved on. But part of me wanted to know what he had to say. After all, he was the one who'd been pulling the strings, the one who had taken my wife away from me. So, I agreed to meet him. Not because I wanted to reconcile or even understand, but because I needed closure. When I showed up at the coffee shop, Chris was sitting by the window, his face drawn, his eyes a little guilty. He wasn't the arrogant guy I had imagined. He seemed almost sorry. I didn't mean for it to get out of hand, Chris began, running his hands through his hair nervously. I never wanted to hurt anyone. But I wasn't the one who started all this. She was the one who reached out to me first. It hit me like a brick. Emily had been the one to reach out to him. She'd initiated all of it. I never wanted to be the bad guy, Chris continued, almost pleading. But when she started talking to me, I thought, maybe it could be something real. I didn't want to be the one to tear your marriage apart, but you know how it is when things start to feel good again. I wanted to yell. I wanted to tell him he had no right to justify what had happened, no right to play the victim in all of this. But I stayed silent, letting him speak. I never meant to hurt you, Chris said, his voice cracking. But Emily, she wanted more, and I could offer her that. She told me she was unhappy, that she needed excitement. She wasn't getting it from you. The words felt like they cut through me. Emily wasn't just bored with our life. She had actively sought out someone else, someone who could give her what she thought she needed. That's when I realized something. I had been so focused on her betrayal, I hadn't truly understood the deeper problem. Emily didn't just want someone else. She wanted a life that was different, a life that didn't involve the responsibilities and routines we had built together. You think it's that easy? I finally said, my voice low. You think she just wanted excitement, that she was somehow entitled to that? What about me? What about our family? Chris's face fell, his regret written all over it. I didn't mean to be the one to break it to you, but I think Emily, she's struggling with something deeper. She doesn't know what she wants, and maybe for a while, she thought she'd found it with me. The reality of it all was setting in. Chris wasn't the villain here. He was just a man caught in the middle of something that was much bigger than him. The villain was the distance that had formed between Emily and me. the cracks in our marriage that neither of us had addressed until it was too late. As I sat there, absorbing the weight of it all, I realized I had to face the truth. Emily wasn't just looking for someone else. She was looking for a version of herself that she had lost along the way. The ambitious, carefree woman she had been before the kids, before the responsibilities, before the monotony of life set in. And I had been so focused on keeping things together, so focused on the idea of protecting our family, that I had failed to see what was happening. After that conversation with Chris, things changed. I could no longer see Emily through the lens of betrayal alone. It wasn't that I had forgiven her. No, forgiveness didn't come easily, but I could understand her better now. And that understanding made the decision even harder. A few days later, Emily and I had another talk. This one was different. It was raw, vulnerable. She finally admitted that she had been unhappy for a long time, that she had felt suffocated by the responsibilities of being a wife and a mother, that she had lost sight of who she was outside of those roles. "I didn't know how to talk to you about it," Emily confessed. "I felt like I was drowning. And when I met Chris again, it was like everything came back to life. I wasn't thinking clearly. Evan, I was just so desperate for something to change." I listened, even though it was hard. My anger had dulled a bit, replaced by a deep sadness. We had both neglected the things that made us strong as a couple. But the truth was, I wasn't sure we could fix it. I wasn't sure I could go back to how things were before. "You don't just fix this," I said, my voice shaking. "You can't just pretend like everything's fine, Emily. We have to face the damage that's been done." She nodded, her eyes filled with tears. I know I hurt you, and I don't deserve another chance, but I want to try. I want to fix it." But the question lingered in my mind. Was it too late? Was there anything left to fix? We spent hours talking, trying to find a way forward, but the more we talked, the more I realized something. Emily was no longer the woman I had married. She was someone else, a woman who had been struggling with her own desires, her own identity. And me. I wasn't sure if I was still the man she wanted. That night, after we put the kids to bed, I sat alone in the living room. I needed time to think, to process everything that had been said. My phone buzzed again, and this time, it was a message from Emily. It was short, but it hit me harder than anything else. "I love you, Evan, but I think we've both changed. I don't know if we can go back to what we had." I stared at the screen, the weight of her words sinking in. This wasn't just about trust anymore. This was about who we had become. And maybe, just maybe, we had both outgrown each other. The next day, I made a decision. It wasn't easy, but I knew what had to be done. I had to let her go. When I told Emily, her face fell, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the same pain in her eyes that I had been feeling. She knew this was coming, but the finality of it made it harder to accept. And so, we started the process. Slowly, painfully. There was no more pretending, no more lies. There was only the truth, and the realization that sometimes love isn't enough to hold two people together when they've drifted too far apart. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me tell more stories just like this. The moment I made the decision to end things, the weight of it hit me like a freight train. It wasn't just the anger I had been feeling, it was the crushing realization that everything had changed. Emily wasn't just a wife who had cheated on me. She was a woman who had lost herself, and I had been too blind to see it. We both had been lost in different ways. And now, no matter how hard we tried to hold on to what was left, it felt like we were slipping through each other's fingers. I remember that last night we spent in the same house. Before the final conversation, Emily stayed quiet for the most part. retreating into herself, perhaps knowing that nothing could fix what was broken. I too found myself wrapped up in a cloud of confusion, moving through the motions, thinking about everything that had led us here. It was strange, really, how quickly things had spiraled. Just a few months earlier, everything had felt so secure. We were a family. We had routines. We had love. But those cracks, those small, insidious cracks, had been there all along. I had chosen not to see them because I was comfortable. I thought we had time, that we could make things work. But now, here I was, standing on the precipice of something I didn't want to face. Reality. The morning came far too quickly. Emily was already up when I walked into the kitchen. She didn't look at me right away, just stirred her coffee as the sunlight filtered through the blinds. I didn't know what to say. What do you say when you've made a decision and there's no going back? I've been thinking, Emily said softly, breaking the silence. She didn't meet my eyes, but I could hear the tremble in her voice. I'm sorry for everything I should have told you, how I felt I should have been honest with you, instead of running away. I nodded, but my heart wasn't in it. I know, I said, my voice almost a whisper. We both should have been honest. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, watching her crumble, knowing that it was my decision that had led us here. But I had to stick to my choice. I couldn't live in this lie anymore, pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. And truthfully, I wasn't sure I could love her the way I once had, not after everything. Where do we go from here? She asked, her voice fragile. I don't know, I replied, my mind racing. But I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending. There was a long pause. The weight of our words hanging in the air, Emily started to cry, soft sobs escaping her as she buried her face in her hands. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay, but I knew it wouldn't. It couldn't. I think we both need to heal, I said after a moment, trying to find the right words. And maybe that means being apart for a while, maybe forever. The finality of it hung between us. Emily looked at me then, her eyes red and swollen from the tears. She wasn't angry. She didn't try to fight me on it. Instead, there was an almost resigned sadness in her expression, as if she understood that we were both at fault, but that we had reached a point where there was no turning back. That night, she packed her things. It was quiet, almost too quiet. I helped her with the basics, clothes, toiletries, the few things she couldn't bear to leave behind. We didn't speak much as we moved through the motions of separating our lives. I think we both knew that nothing more needed to be said. The conversation was over, and the real work, living with the consequences, was just beginning. When she left, the house felt empty. The kids were at their grandmother's, and I was left alone with nothing but the weight of my thoughts. I stood in the living room, staring at the space we had shared for so many years, and felt this deep ache in my chest. It was like the very walls of the house were mourning, as if they too understood that the life we had built was over. I didn't know what to do with myself. For the first time in a long time, I had no direction. I didn't have a plan. I had no idea what the future held, only the uncertainty of what came next. I had to rebuild. I had to find myself again. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I started to feel something resembling clarity. I had been busy with work, trying to focus on the kids, and pushing aside the gnawing loneliness that came with living alone. Emily had reached out a few times, but I kept things brief. I wasn't ready to talk. I wasn't ready to hear her voice. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from Sylvia. She had been staying with her mother for a while now, trying to stay out of the mess that had unfolded, but I could tell something was wrong in her voice. "Dad, I need to talk to you," she said, sounding more serious than I'd heard her in a while. It's about Mom. I felt my stomach drop. What about her? Can you come over? It's important. That was all it took. I drove to the townhouse where Emily was staying. Unsure of what to expect, Sylvia was waiting outside when I arrived, her expression tense. She's not doing well, Dad, Sylvia said as soon as I stepped out of the car. She's been really hard on herself. I think she's starting to regret everything. She's falling apart. I felt a pang of guilt, but it was mixed with something else. Something I didn't want to admit. I was angry at Emily, yes, but I still loved her, in a way. And the thought of her suffering, it hurt. She won't talk to me anymore, Sylvia continued. I've tried to reach out, but she won't let me in. She keeps saying she's fine, but I know she's not, Dad. She needs help. She needs someone to get through to her. I stood there, unsure of what to say. I don't know if I can help her, sweetheart, I said quietly. I'm not sure if I'm the person who can fix this. But Sylvia looked at me, her eyes full of desperation. Maybe not fix it, but you could at least try. She needs you, Dad. I can't do it for her. I didn't know if I could help her, but I knew I couldn't just walk away completely. Not yet. Not when there was still a part of me that cared, a part of me that wanted to believe things could be different. That evening, I found myself standing outside Emily's townhouse, hesitant to knock on the door. I wasn't sure what kind of reception I would get, or if this would be another wasted attempt. But the moment I stepped inside, I could feel the heaviness in the air. The silence between us was thick, filled with unspoken words. Emily was sitting on the couch, her eyes red from crying, her face pale. When she saw me, she didn't jump up or try to put on a brave face. She just looked at me, defeated. Evan, she whispered. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know what's left. You don't have to fix it, Emily, I said softly, walking toward her. You just need to figure out what you want. What you really want. There was a long pause, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she looked at me with something other than guilt in her eyes. There was vulnerability, and maybe, just maybe, that was the start of something new. This was the turning point. We weren't going to fix everything overnight, but we were going to take the first steps, even if those steps were small. The tension between us was still there, but now it was different. We were facing the reality of what had happened. We weren't running from it anymore. If you're invested in how this story unfolds, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support means everything to me. The night after I spoke to Emily, something shifted. The tension in the room, which had been thick with unspoken resentments and raw emotions, seemed to lighten just a little. But there was still so much between us that needed to be said, so much to unpack. Our marriage had been hanging by a thread for so long, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be repaired. The days that followed were a blur of emotions, filled with long conversations, heated debates, and many sleepless nights. Emily tried to reach out, tried to explain how much she regretted everything that had happened. She talked about her fears, her desires, the feelings she had kept locked away for years. But as much as I wanted to believe her, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were both too far gone. I kept asking myself, was it worth trying to put everything back together? Could we ever go back to what we once had? Or were we just two people holding on to something that had already crumbled beyond repair? A few days later, Emily made a decision that would change everything. She called me and asked if we could meet. I hesitated. At first, I wasn't sure if I was ready to face her again, but something in her voice made me agree. She told me she had made a choice, and she needed to tell me in person. When I arrived at the coffee shop where we had agreed to meet, I saw her sitting by the window, her eyes red from crying. She had been through so much, and I couldn't deny that I felt sorry for her. But the pain I was feeling was overwhelming, and I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to handle another conversation about what had happened. "Evan," she said as I sat down, her voice trembling. "I've been thinking a lot. I've been thinking about everything. About us. About what we had. And I've realized something. I can't keep living in this limbo anymore. I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when I know it's not. I love you, Evan. I always have. But I need to be honest with myself and with you." My heart raced in my chest. I wasn't sure what she was going to say, but I felt a sense of dread creeping over me. What was she going to ask? What was she going to do? "I need to leave," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt like the ground beneath me had been pulled away. It wasn't the response I had expected. I had been bracing myself for her to ask for another chance, for another shot at rebuilding our marriage, but this was the final nail in the coffin. "What?" I managed to say, barely able to get the words out. "I need to find myself again," she said, her voice breaking. "I've been so lost for so long, and I've been using you as a crutch. I don't want to keep holding on to something that isn't real anymore. I need to figure out who I am without you, without the life we built together." The words felt like a punch to the gut. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't prepared to hear her say that. We had spent so many years together, so many memories built on love and commitment, and now she was telling me that she needed to leave. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, trying to process everything that had happened between us, but one thing became clear. I couldn't keep holding on to someone who was no longer sure about us. "I think it's time too," I said, my voice barely audible. "Maybe it's time for both of us to figure out who we are without each other." There was a long silence between us, filled with the weight of everything that had been said. Emily's face was streaked with tears, and I could see the pain in her eyes. I wanted to comfort her, but I knew that wasn't what she needed from me anymore. What she needed was space, and what I needed was the closure that had been so long coming. Over the next few weeks, we began the slow process of untangling our lives. Emily moved out of the townhouse, and I stayed in the house, trying to make sense of what had happened. I spent more time with the kids, trying to keep things as normal as possible for them, but I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. We had both changed in ways that were impossible to reverse. During this time, I started to see things differently. I had spent so long trying to hold on to a version of my marriage that no longer existed. I had been so focused on the past, on what we had been, that I hadn't noticed the cracks forming beneath the surface. Emily had been right about one thing. Neither of us knew who we were anymore. As much as it hurt to admit, I knew that I had to let go. It wasn't just for her, it was for me too. I couldn't keep living in the past. I had to find a way to move forward, to rebuild my own life and figure out who I was without her. It was in those quiet moments, when I was alone with my thoughts, that I realized something. I had been afraid of change. I had been afraid of letting go of what I thought was safe and familiar. But now, with everything falling apart around me, I realized that sometimes, the only way to move forward is to let go of the things that are holding you back. The real turning point came one evening, when I ran into Sylvia. She had been staying with her mother, and I hadn't seen her in a while. I was walking through town, trying to clear my head, when I saw her standing outside the coffee shop where Emily and I used to meet. She was waiting for me, and when she saw me, she smiled. "Dad," she said, her voice warm. "How are you doing?" I didn't know how to answer. How do you explain that everything is falling apart, that the life you once knew is gone? But Sylvia wasn't asking for details. She wasn't looking for an explanation. She was just there for me. "I'm getting by," I said, forcing a smile. "It's just a lot to process." "I know," she said softly, her expression understanding. "Mum's been really hard on herself lately. She doesn't know what to do. She keeps saying she regrets everything. but she doesn't know how to fix it. I don't know if I can fix it either. I nodded. Sylvia had always been perceptive. She could see things I didn't want to see, but she never judged. She just listened. She's not the same, I said quietly. I don't think I am either. Maybe we're not supposed to be the same, Sylvia said, her eyes thoughtful. Maybe we're supposed to change. Maybe that's what's supposed to happen. Her words struck me in a way I wasn't expecting. Maybe we were both in the process of becoming something different, something new. And maybe that was okay. Maybe the change didn't have to be something to fear. Maybe it could be an opportunity to rebuild, to start again. It wasn't easy. The process of healing, of figuring out who we were without each other, was long and painful. But with time, I began to see that there was a future beyond the pain, a future where I could move forward, learn from my mistakes, and start over. Emily reached out a few more times, but each time I felt more and more detached. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't holding on to resentment, I was just moving forward, and that was all I could do. If you're still with me on this emotional journey, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more. Your support helps me keep these stories going. The weeks after Emily moved out were a strange mix of quiet and chaos. On the surface, things seemed to calm down, but beneath the surface, I was still grappling with the aftermath of everything. The house felt emptier, the silence heavier, and every corner seemed to echo with memories of what we once were. But somewhere along the way, something changed within me. At first, I wasn't sure what the future held. I was still angry, still hurt, and yet, there was a strange sense of clarity settling in. Emily's departure wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was also the beginning of something new for me, something I hadn't realized I needed. I had spent so many years focused on her, on us, on trying to keep everything together, that I had lost sight of myself. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be Evan, the man I was before I became a husband, a father. Slowly, painfully, I started to rediscover who I was. I started doing things I hadn't done in years, taking long walks by the water, reconnecting with old friends, picking up hobbies I had abandoned. It wasn't about replacing what I had lost. It was about reclaiming the parts of myself I had buried for so long. Emily, too, was going through her own transformation. She reached out a few times, but every conversation felt like a test, an attempt to rekindle something that was already gone. I didn't blame her for wanting closure, for wanting to make sense of everything. But I realized that I couldn't be the person she turned to for answers anymore. She had to find her own way, just like I had to find mine. It wasn't easy for either of us. There were days when I missed her, when the weight of our past would come rushing back, and I'd wonder if I had made the right decision. But then, I'd remember how far we had drifted apart, how much we had neglected each other's needs, and I knew I had done what was necessary. We both needed space to heal, to grow, to become the people we were meant to be. Months passed. Life began to take on a new rhythm, a rhythm I hadn't known in years. The kids adjusted to the new arrangement, and while it wasn't perfect, we made it work. Sylvia visited more often, and her quiet wisdom was a reminder of the strength that runs through this family. She had grown up a lot during this time, matured in ways I hadn't expected. And Jack, though quieter, was finding his own way through this too. I could see him beginning to understand that life doesn't always go according to plan, but that doesn't mean it's the end. It's just the beginning of something different. As for Emily, she continued her journey of self-discovery. I heard through Sylvia that she had started working with a therapist, trying to sort through her emotions, her regrets, and her desires. She was making strides, though it was clear it would take time before she could truly move on. I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief, knowing that she was finally addressing the things she had ignored for so long. I didn't know what the future held for her or for us, but I knew that I had done what I needed to do for myself. One afternoon, several months after our separation, Emily called me. It wasn't an emergency, but there was a nervousness in her voice that made me pause. "Can we talk?" she asked, her tone hesitant. I agreed, and we met at a local park, a neutral space, somewhere we could have a conversation without the emotional baggage of the house we used to share. We sat down on a bench, and there was a long pause before she spoke. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, her voice steady but soft. "I've been working on myself, and I realize now that I've spent so much of my life trying to be someone I wasn't. I was so wrapped up in what I thought I was supposed to be. A wife, a mother, the perfect woman. But I wasn't being honest with myself. I wasn't being honest with you." I could hear the sincerity in her voice, and for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of the woman I had once loved. She wasn't perfect, and neither was I, but this was a step forward. "I'm not asking for anything, Evan," she said, her eyes meeting mine with an openness I hadn't seen before. "I don't expect us to get back together. I just want you to know that I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry for the lies, for the hurt I never meant to cause you this pain, and I think I finally understand why it had to end the way it did." Her words were like a balm, soothing some of the scars that had been left on my heart. But I also knew that this wasn't about us getting back together. It was about finding closure. It was about us both moving forward, without the baggage of our past weighing us down. "I'm sorry too," I said, my voice more steady than I expected. I didn't handle things perfectly either. I was angry, and I didn't know how to talk to you, but we both needed to face the truth. And maybe that's why things had to end, so we could find our way back to ourselves. We sat there for a long time, just talking about life, about the kids, about our future, about the things we had learned. It wasn't a dramatic reunion. It wasn't about rekindling a romance. It was about two people who had shared a life together, who had been broken by their own choices, but who had come to terms with the past. We were both different now, but that didn't mean we couldn't find a way to move forward separately, in a way that was healthier for both of us. Months later, things had settled into a new normal. I had found peace with my decision to let go of the past, and I was excited about the future. Though it was still uncertain, Emily continued her work with therapy, and though we didn't speak often, I heard from Sylvia that she was doing better, finding herself, piece by piece. I realized that sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that lead to the most growth. Letting go of Emily wasn't easy, but it was necessary for both of us. We both needed space to heal, to evolve into the people we were meant to be. As for me, I learned that love isn't always enough to fix everything. Sometimes, love means knowing when to walk away, knowing when it's time to let go, and trusting that both people will be okay in the end. I didn't have all the answers, but I was learning to trust myself again. I was learning that even after the hardest of times, there's always hope for something new. The final chapter of our story wasn't filled with fireworks or grand gestures. It was quiet, reflective, and real. We had both changed. We had both learned. And now, it was time for us to live the lives we had always deserved. Separately, but in peace. If you've been following this journey, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me keep telling these stories. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join me for the next one.